February 24th, 1978. Five men go to a college basketball game. The Chico State Wildcats against the U Davis Aggies. In addition, the next day they would be playing in their own basketball game in a tournament sponsored by the Special Olympics. The five men, Ted Weiher, Gary Mathias, Jack Madruga, Jack Hewitt, and Bill Sterling, had become close friends and were known as the Boys. All five men lived in the Yuba City area. On that Friday night, Jack Madruga picked the others up in his 1969 Mercury Montego for the 1-hour drive to California State University, Chico. UC Davis ended up defeating Chico State. Once the game was over, they drove over to Bears Market, not far from the venue, and grabbed some snacks for the hour-long drive home, which angered the clerk since they showed up right as they were closing up for the night. The men purchased their items and headed out. Little did the angry clerk know that she would be the last person to see the five friends. This is the story of what would come to be known as the Yuba County Five. As the five friends were checking out the basketball game, Joe Shans was driving his Volkswagen up to the Plumas National Forest to check out the road's condition, since his family had planned a weekend trip to the Rogers campground the following day. As he made his way up the mountain, he ended up getting the Volkswagen stuck in the snow. Joe tried to push the car out, but as he did, he felt the early symptoms of a heart attack come on. Stuck in the snow, unable to move, and miles away from civilization, all he could do was get back into his car, wait, and hope that the symptoms would pass. Sometime later, Joe noticed a set of headlights approaching from behind, stopping about 20 feet behind him. Remaining in the car, he could just barely see a couple men and a woman holding a baby get out of the truck. Knowing this was his best chance of getting out of there, he got out of the Volkswagen to try to flag these people down. Then, suddenly, the voices stopped and the headlights disappeared. 6 hours later, Joe saw a group of people walking up with flashlights behind the Volkswagen. Once again, he tried to flag them down, but they too faded away into the night. Eventually, when Joe felt strong enough, he decided to try to walk out for help. After an 8-mile walk, he came across a lodge where the manager drove him home. On their way, they passed a 1969 Mercury Montego at the point he remembered the voices coming from, but no one was around. Meanwhile, the five young men still hadn't made it back home from the game. The men were all accustomed to a somewhat strict routine that they followed every night, and it was not like any of them not to return home. Their parents knew that something was very, very wrong, especially given that they had an important game to play for their team, the Gateway Gators, the next day. The concerned parents notified authorities to file missing persons reports, but the fact that they were all grown adults didn't exactly make it a priority for the police. But these weren't just ordinary grown men that seemed to have vanished. These five men, Weiher, Mathias, Madruga, Hewitt, and Sterling, each had a form of a learning disability. Plus, Gary Mathias had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. The basketball team they played for, the Gateway Gators, was part of the Yuba County Gateway program that specifically helped individuals with these afflictions. If the authorities had moved a little faster on the reports, perhaps the outcome could have been different. Several days later, once the family started putting up missing persons posters about the five missing men, a park ranger reported that he had seen a 1969 Mercury Montego stuck in a snowdrift along the Oroville-Quincy Road in the Plumas National Forest at an elevation of 4,400 feet. When authorities and the families went out to the car, they noticed a few things that seemed strange. For starters, the driver's window was partially rolled down. Jack Madruga's family said that he would never have done this. The car was his prized possession, and he was very particular about the interior condition of the vehicle. He always rolled all of his windows up. In addition, They said that Jack disliked the cold weather and had never been up to the mountains. Authorities noticed that the underside of the car was in near-perfect condition, which would seem unlikely due to 5 grown adults driving along a bumpy mountain road full of potholes after dark. The low-hanging exhaust on the car had no dents or scrapes. But the most puzzling fact so far was that where the vehicle was found stuck in the snow, 5 strong adult men such as themselves would have had absolutely no problem pushing the car out, opting instead to walk up the mountain further into the Plumas National Forest, instead of back down toward the main road for help. Search teams were formed and fanned out across the rocky and rough terrain. Snow levels made efforts that much more difficult, and eventually the search had to be terminated. Leads and alleged sightings were reported over the next few months, but none led to any new developments. The men were left to try to survive on their own in the Plumas Mountains. A group of motorcyclists rode into the Plumas National Forest on June 4, 1978, 3.5 months after the 5 men disappeared. 19 miles north of where the car was found, they saw a service trailer operated by the U.S. Forest Service at a campsite and stopped to take a look. They saw a broken window, and when they looked inside, they made a terrible discovery. Inside, they saw Ted Weir's body covered with 8 sheets. His shoes had been removed, and his feet appeared to have had severe frostbite and gangrene. Oddly, Gary Mathias' shoes were discovered inside the trailer. Authorities discovered that between the time he disappeared and the time he died, apparently of starvation and hypothermia, he had lost nearly 100 pounds, half his body weight. Search teams were again called in and fanned out from the abandoned campground service trailer. 4 miles away, they found remains on opposite sides of the road that were later identified as those of Bill Sterling and Jack Madruga. Madruga was found with the keys to his prized possession, his 1969 Mercury Montego, in his hand. Autopsies would later determine that both died of hypothermia. A short time later, Jack Hewitt's father found his son's skeletal remains 2 miles northeast of the trailer. Like the others, cause of death was determined to be from hypothermia. As of today, Gary Mathias' remains have yet to be found. Why was Jack Madruga's car up in the Plumas National Forest? From the location where it was found, it was 70 miles from Chico State where they watched the basketball game, and at least 35 miles away from their homes. The only real piece of information authorities had to go off was the statement given by Joe Schanz, who had a mild heart attack when his Volkswagen became stuck in the snow up on the mountain. Several people who knew Joe told police that he wasn't exactly known for telling the truth, and that he liked to tell stories and embellish them. Over the course of several interviews with investigators, they found that Joe's story would change every time he told it. Eventually, Joe would tell authorities that he could have just imagined what he saw out there, delirious from the mild heart attack he was suffering. When authorities interviewed the locals around Bears Market near Chico State, several said there had been a fight outside the store as the 5 men were leaving. It was reported that Gary Mathias tried sticking up for his friends, which started the brawl. Several believe that after the Yuba County Five left, the other party may have chased after them. The belief is that the men drove up the mountain into the forest in an attempt to shake off the men chasing them. When the car eventually got stuck, they abandoned it and continued on foot further up the mountain. Some believe that Gary Mathias had a schizophrenic episode and either talked Madruga into or forced him into driving up the mountain road. Mathias' family told investigators, however, that Gary had not had an episode in several years and was adamant about taking his medication on time. Some think that the men were headed to Forbestown to see a friend of Gary Mathias and got lost. This seems unlikely, though, due to all the men strictly adhering to their normal routines and the fact that they had a very important game to play the following morning. And then, They could have just got lost. They could have taken a wrong turn and simply drove up the mountain looking for a good place to turn around. But when the car got stuck, why did they continue up the mountain 19 miles to the trailer where the first set of remains were found, when they could have just as easily walked out the way they came? Then there is the trailer itself. It had a massive food supply inside and materials to start a fire. It also had a propane heater that would have operated if someone would have just lit it, but the men used none of these things. Ted Weir's remains being wrapped up in 8 sheets would indicate that he at least attempted to stay warm, but why didn't he light the heater or start a fire? And why were they in the Plumas National Forest in the first place? They ended up 70 miles away from Chico State and in the opposite direction of their homes in Yuba City. Ted Weir's body condition indicates that he likely survived for quite some time after the group disappeared. The drastic weight loss and frostbitten feet led authorities to believe he could have survived up to 3 months in that trailer. This means that the group had ample opportunity to try to get help, but for some reason didn't. The distance between Weir's body and the remains of Sterling, Madruga, and Hewitt indicates that at least some of them tried to make their way out, albeit in different directions. The car's condition left investigators puzzled. Although stuck in the snow, no damage was found on the underside of the car, which, given the rugged terrain of the unmaintained road, indicates that Madruga was being extremely careful driving up the mountain, all but ruling out the possibility that the men were being chased. The case of what really happened to the Yuba County Five today remains a mystery. Every shred of evidence uncovered simply leads to more unanswered questions. One would believe that after finding a service trailer well stocked with rations and ample supplies for warmth, if one was lost, that they would use those resources. But strangely they didn't. And what happened to Gary Mathias? Did he make it out? Or does he remain, 46 years later, somewhere in the Plumas National Forest?